Christian archaeology is a weapon of faith in the arsenal of proving to this modern scientific world that the stories in the Bible are real.
Most people think the timeline of history is set in stone, but beneath the red dust of Armenia, a team of researchers just hit something that shouldn't be there. It wasn't just a wall or a pot, it was an octagonal shape hidden for 1,700 years. This structure predates almost everything we know about official Christianity. The censors screamed that something massive was buried under the ancient city of Artaxata. When they finally broke ground, they didn't just find a building, they found a link to a past that was supposed to be erased. The shape that shouldn't be there. The ground does not lie. We might lose books, burn scrolls, and forget legends, but the earth keeps a perfect record of everything we try to hide. For over a century, the ancient city of Artaxata was just a footnote for most people. It was a ruin in the shadow of the biblical Mount Ararat, a place where the wind howled over empty fields and farmers grazed their sheep on top of an empire. But a team from the University of Munster decided to look deeper. They weren't using shovels, at least not at first. They were using magnetic prospection. Basically, they were X-raying the floor of the valley. They expected to find the usual things, maybe some old Roman walls, perhaps a few broken pots, or the outline of a simple house. That is what you usually find in these digs. But here's the catch. The data that came back didn't look like a house. It looked like a message. On the screen, a distinct shape emerged from the noise. It was huge. It measured about 100 feet across, but it was the geometry that made the blood run cold in the veins of the archaeologists. It wasn't a square. It wasn't a rectangle. It was an octagon. A perfect 8-sided structure with cross-shaped extensions jutting out from the sides. You have to understand why this is strange. In the ancient world, you didn't just build octagons for fun. That shape meant something very specific. It was reserved for the most sacred, most important monuments of the time. It is the same shape used for the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, the place where tradition says Jesus was buried. Finding this shape here, thousands of miles away in the rugged terrain of Armenia, was like finding a key to a lock we didn't know existed. The technology they used to find this is fascinating in itself. Magnetic prospection works by detecting tiny anomalies in the Earth's magnetic field. When humans disturb the soil by digging a ditch, building a wall, or burning a fire, it changes the magnetic signature of that dirt forever. It is like a fingerprint that never fades. The team, led by Professor Achim Lichtenberger and Dr. Torben Schreiber, was driving their sensors over the ground when the reading spiked. They realized they were standing on top of the oldest archaeologically documented church in the entire country. And remember, Armenia isn't just any country. It was the first nation in history to adopt Christianity as its official religion. They did it in the year 301. That is more than a decade before the Roman Empire stopped hunting Christians down. This building dates back to the 4th century. That puts it right at the explosive beginning of this massive cultural shift. The floor was paved with terracotta tiles. The walls were thick, and the platforms were made of mortar. This was not a temporary shack. This was a cathedral of power. But the shape, the octagon, implies something else. In ancient architecture, the octagon is often called the intermediate shape. The square represents the earth. 4 corners, 4 directions. The circle represents the heavens, eternal, perfect. The octagon is the bridge between them. It is the shape of transition. It is the shape of resurrection. So if you build a massive octagon in the capital city of Artaxata, you are not just building a church. You are building a gateway. You are building a machine designed to move something from the earthly realm to the divine realm, or perhaps to bring something down. But why was it here? And more importantly, why did it vanish? The city of Artaxata was once a metropolis. It was the capital of kings. It was a hub of the Silk Road, and then it was gone. The church was destroyed, buried under feet of mud and dirt, hidden from the eyes of thieves and historians alike. When the team finally put spades in the ground and verified the magnetic data, they confirmed the impossible. They had found a physical link to the days of Gregory the Illuminator, the man who converted the king and changed the fate of the region. But finding the building was just the start, because when you find a structure designed to hold a mystery, you have to ask yourself what it was protecting. An octagon is a vault. it is a container. And the things buried in Artaxata might just rewrite the story we have been telling ourselves for 2,000 years. Here is where the theories start to get wild. Some researchers speculate that the specific alignment of this octagon isn't just about Jerusalem. They believe it might align with other ancient sites, creating a sort of grid of power. If you look at the placement of the Holy Sepulchre, the Church of the Nativity, and now this discovery in Artaxata, they form a specific geometric pattern across the Middle East. Was this building placed here to tap into some kind of telluric current? Was it a battery for spiritual energy? It sounds crazy, but the ancients were obsessed with location. They didn't build randomly. They built where the earth felt alive. And right next to this site is Mount Ararat, the legendary resting place of Noah's Ark. If you were going to build a vault to hold the most important secrets of the New World, wouldn't you build it next to the mountain that saved humanity from the Old World? The discovery of the octagon has opened a door that many people didn't want opened. It challenges the timeline. It challenges the geography of faith. And as the team digs deeper, removing the layers of clay and sand, they are getting closer to the center. And the center of an octagon is never empty. The real mystery wasn't the building, but what lay beneath. The secret history of the conversion. To understand why this vault in the ground matters, you have to look at the blood-soaked history of the ground itself. It is not that simple, though. We tend to think of history as a neat line of dates, but the story of Artaxata is more like a psychological horror movie. Go back to the year 300. The Roman Empire is to the west, still worshiping Jupiter and Mars. The Persian Empire is to the east, lighting fires for Zoroaster. And sandwiched in the middle is Armenia. The ruler is King Tiridates III, and by all accounts, he was a brutal, efficient warlord. He was a man who solved problems with a sword. The story goes that a man named Gregory came to the court. Gregory wasn't a warrior, he was a preacher. He refused to offer a sacrifice to the pagan goddess Anahit. In the ancient world, refusing the king wasn't just rude, it was a death sentence. It was treason. But Tiridates didn't end him quickly. That would have been too easy. Instead, he threw Gregory into a pit, a deep, dark hole in the ground known as Khor Virap. It was infested with snakes and scorpions. It was a place designed to drive men mad before they perished from thirst. This wasn't a jail cell, it was a grave with the lid left open. Gregory survived in that pit for 14 years. 14 years in the dark. Think about that for a second. How does a human being survive 14 years in a snake pit without sunlight, with barely any food? The official story says a woman threw him bread every day. But let's look at the wilder theory. What if Gregory didn't just sit in the dark? What if the pit of Khor Virap was actually an entrance to something else? Some theorists suggest that during those 14 years, Gregory discovered something beneath the earth. Maybe he found an ancient archive, a pre-flood vault, or a source of knowledge that gave him the power to survive. Maybe his illumination wasn't just spiritual, maybe it was literal. He found a light in the darkness. While Gregory was in the hole, King Tiridates lost his mind. The legends say he turned into a boar. Now, maybe he didn't literally grow tusks and fur, but he likely suffered from a severe mental breakdown, perhaps clinical lycanthropy. He was howling at the moon, running through the forests of Artaxata like a wild animal. The court was in panic. The strongest kingdom in the Caucasus was falling apart because the king was insane. Then the king's sister had a dream. She was told that only the prisoner in the pit could cure the king. So they dragged Gregory up from the depths. He was barely human, covered in filth, blinded by the sun. But he walked up to the king, prayed, and the madness lifted. Tiridates was healed. And in a moment of absolute clarity, or perhaps political genius, he declared that Armenia would no longer worship the old gods. They would follow Gregory's God. In 301, Armenia became the first Christian state in the world. This is where the discovery of the octagon comes in. The church found by the German Armenian team dates to this exact period. It corresponds to the lifetime of Gregory and Tiridates. This wasn't just a local parish. This was likely built to commemorate that shift. The location in Artaxata, the capital, suggests this was ground zero for the new order. The marble pieces found at the site were imported. They came from the Mediterranean. Think about the cost of hauling heavy marble slabs over mountains and rivers in the 4th century. You don't do that for a normal building, you do that for a monument that is supposed to last forever. But here is the twist. This church was built right on top of the old pagan infrastructure. The archaeologists found remains of wooden platforms coated in mortar. They found evidence that the church was constructed to physically crush the past beneath its weight. It was a dominance move. It was a way of sealing the old gods underground. But what if it was also a way of sealing what Gregory found? What if the pit and the octagon are connected? The octagon is a shape of containment. If the king had been possessed by a madness and Gregory had cured him, maybe they built this structure to ensure that whatever caused the madness never came back. We know that ancient cultures believed in binding spirits. They used geometric shapes to trap entities. The octagon, with its 8 sides, is often seen as a protective shield. Is it possible that the Church of Artaxata isn't just a place of worship, but a spiritual prison? And then there is the matter of the texts. Gregory the Illuminator didn't just bring a vibe, he brought a doctrine. But the Christianity of the 4th century wasn't the polished version we have today. It was wild, diverse, and full of heretical ideas. If Gregory had access to texts that were later banned by Rome, where would he hide them? He wouldn't burn them. He would bury them. He would put them in a vault beneath the most important church in the kingdom, protected by the king he saved. The destruction of the city centuries later might have been the best thing that ever happened to those secrets. It sealed them in. The University of Munster team is now standing on top of this legacy. They are digging through the floor of a building that was born from madness and miracles. And every layer they remove brings us closer to understanding what really happened between the king and the saint in those dark years. The octagon was built to guard a terrifying secret, hidden in plain sight. Yeah, about that shape, we need to talk about why the octagon is the smoking gun of this entire discovery. In modern architecture, we build things to be functional. Squares are easy, rectangles are efficient. But in the 4th century, every shape was a code. The number 8 was symbolic. It represented the 8th day, the day of resurrection, the new beginning that comes after the 7 days of creation. Building an 8-sided structure wasn't an aesthetic choice. It was a theological weapon. It was a way of saying this place is a portal to the next world. When the University of Munster team analyzed the layout, they realized it had a diameter of roughly 100 feet. That is massive. To give you a comparison, that is wider than the White House is tall. This was a monumental undertaking. The most famous octagonal buildings of the ancient world are the Golden Octagon in Antioch and, of course, the Rotunda in Jerusalem over the tomb of Jesus. By building this in Artaxata, the Armenian kings were sending a signal to Rome and the rest of the world. They were saying, "We are the new Jerusalem." But get this, the octagonal shape is also highly practical for guarding a central point. In many ancient martyriums, churches built over the remains of a saint or a holy object, the design is central. The faithful would walk in a circle around the center. The focus wasn't a stage at the front, it was the floor in the middle. The team found remains of the terracotta floor, but what is missing is just as important as what is there. The center of these structures often contained a crypt or a reliquary. A vault. Let's dive into a wild theory here. The Knights Templar, centuries later, were obsessed with octagonal structures. They built their churches in this shape. Why? Because they were looking for the secrets of the Temple of Solomon. The Templars believed that the octagon held the key to sacred geometry, a way of tapping into the divine frequencies of the universe. If the Armenians knew this secret 700 years before the Templars, what were they using it for? Some fringe historians suggest that the octagon is actually a containment field for the Ark of the Covenant. The Bible says the Ark was lost. Ethiopian tradition says it is in Axum. But Armenian tradition says the Ark of Noah is right next door on the mountain. What if the relics of the old world, the technology or power sources of the antediluvian age, were brought down from the mountain and stored here? It sounds like science fiction, but look at the timeline. Artaxata was the closest major city to the landing site of the Ark. If you found something on that mountain, you wouldn't leave it in the snow, you would bring it to your capital. You would build a massive, impenetrable vault around it, and you would shape that vault to contain its power. The destruction of the church creates a perfect seal. The mud brick walls collapsed, creating an airtight cap over the foundation. If there is a lower level, a crypt or a sub-basement, it hasn't been touched in 1,500 years. We know that early Christians in this region had texts and traditions that didn't make it into the final Bible we see today. There were gospels and letters circulating in Armenia, Syria, and Persia that were later considered apocryphal or hidden. The Gospel of the Armenians is a term often used to describe lost traditions or texts that emphasize the specific nature of Christ as seen by the Eastern Church. There is a theory that the Forgotten Gospel isn't a book about Jesus' ministry, but a genealogy, a bloodline record, or perhaps a technical manual. The Gnostics, who were very active in this region, believed that the material world was a trap and that knowledge, gnosis, was the key to escape. What if the text buried here is the ultimate Gnostic handbook, the one that tells you how to break the simulation? The Church in Rome spent centuries burning Gnostic texts. They wanted to unify the message, but here on the edge of the empire, the dangerous ideas could survive. The team from Munster is currently analyzing the mortar and the soil for microscopic traces. They are looking for pollen, for wood fibers, for anything that tells them what was inside. But the ground-penetrating radar suggests there are voids beneath the floor. Voids mean empty space. Empty space means a room. If this was the primary church of the first Christian kingdom, it would have housed their most sacred library. When the Persians came to burn the city, the priests would have had two choices: run with the books or hide them. We have seen this movie before. The Dead Sea Scrolls were shoved into jars and hidden in caves to protect them from Roman armies. The Nag Hammadi Library in Egypt was buried in the sand to save it from Orthodox bishops who wanted to burn it. History tells us that when armies march, the truth goes underground. The excavation at Artaxata has only just scratched the surface. They have exposed the floor, the mortar, and the shape. But the cross-shaped extensions of the building point to a complex underneath. This wasn't just a room, it was a compound. Could this be where the original records of the Armenian conversion were kept? Could there be a physical vault containing the writings that Gregory the Illuminator used to convince a mad king to change the world? It is speculation, sure, but in archaeology, today's speculation is tomorrow's museum exhibit. The connection to the Forgotten Gospel isn't just about a literal book, it is about a forgotten version of history, a version where Armenia, not Rome, is the center of the story. And this building is the undeniable proof that this version existed. The silence of the ruins was about to be broken. Rome's forgotten rival. What most people don't realize is how violent the end of this story was. We look at these ruins and see a peaceful dig site. The sun is shining, the researchers are brushing away dust, but the layer they are digging through is a crime scene. Artaxata didn't just fade away, it was murdered. In the mid-5th century, the relationships between Armenia, Rome, and Persia were toxic. Armenia was the buffer zone. It was the rope in a tug-of-war between superpowers. Being the first Christian nation put a target on its back. The Persian Sassanid Empire, which was Zoroastrian, viewed this new religion as a threat. It was a Roman religion, a sign of allegiance to the enemy. So, they attacked. But here's the crazy part. The invasion wasn't just about territory. Some historians argue it was ideological cleansing. The Persians explicitly targeted the religious infrastructure. They wanted to wipe this new cult off the face of the earth. The destruction of Artaxata was thorough. The archaeologists found layers of charcoal and ash. That is the signature of a city put to the torch. The grand octagonal church with its imported marble and terracotta floors was smashed. The roof likely collapsed first, raining burning timber down onto the sacred tiles. Then the walls were pushed in. But why focus so much anger on this one building? If it was just a church, you burn it and move on. But the level of destruction suggests they wanted to make sure nothing survived. They wanted to bury it. This fuels the theory that the Persians knew something was in there. Maybe they weren't just trying to destroy a religion, maybe they were trying to destroy a specific object or text, the Forgotten Gospel or the relic of the Ark. If the Persians couldn't find it, they made sure no one else could either. They dropped a mountain of rubble on top of it. But here's the irony, the destruction actually preserved it. When the walls fell, they sealed the floor. They created a time capsule. If the building had remained standing, it would have been looted, remodeled, or stripped for parts over the next 1,000 years. But because it was destroyed and covered in mud, it stayed frozen in the year 450. This is why the discovery is so significant. It is a pristine snapshot of the very beginning. It is rare to find a church from this era that hasn't been built over by 5 other churches. Usually you have a Byzantine church on top of a Roman temple with a medieval chapel on top of that. Here at Artaxata, we have the raw original footage. The team from Munster used the latest technology to map this destruction. They can see exactly where the pillars fell. They can trace the outline of the courtyard. They found remains of the Sinopian paint, the red pigment used to draft the frescoes on the walls. It brings up a chilling thought. When the city fell, what happened to the people who were guarding this place? Did they escape? Or are they part of the archaeological record too? Did the priests barricade themselves in the vault? There is also a darker theory involving the Vatican. Why are German archaeologists digging this up now? The Vatican has extensive archives, but they are known for being selective about what they release. Some conspiracy theorists believe that Rome has known about the Artaxata vault for centuries, but kept it quiet because whatever is down there contradicts the Roman narrative. If the Armenian church had a gospel that said Peter wasn't the first pope, or that the resurrection happened differently, that would be a problem for Rome. Now that an independent team is digging it up, the clock is ticking. The race is on to see who controls the narrative. The isolation of this site is its greatest protector. For centuries, this area was a borderland. It was a Soviet military zone for a large part of the 20th century. People weren't allowed to just wander around with shovels. The Iron Curtain, in a weird way, kept the ancient curtain closed. Now that the geopolitics have shifted, the science can begin. But the urgency is real. The weather in this region is harsh. Winters are freezing, summers are brutal. Now that the earth is open, the elements are attacking the ruins. The team has to document everything before the snow and wind erase what the Persians couldn't destroy, and that's putting it lightly. The sheer amount of data locked in this mud is overwhelming. Every tile tells us about trade routes. Every scoop of soil tells us about the climate, and the shape of the building tells us about the mind of the ancient believer. They believed that by building this octagon, they were creating a bridge between heaven and earth. And maybe, just maybe, they left something behind to ensure that bridge would never be fully broken. The ash layer acts like a blanket. Beneath it, the oxygen was cut off. Organic matter, like wood, leather, or papyrus, has a much higher chance of surviving in these conditions. If there are scrolls down there, the fire that was meant to destroy them might have actually saved them by baking the clay jars they were stored in. We are looking at a potential Library of Alexandria moment, but on a smaller, more focused scale. A capsule of forbidden knowledge waiting for the right moment to re-emerge. The past was reaching out to grab the present. The final revelation. So here's the deal. We have talked about kings, madness, octagons, burning cities, and secret vaults. But let's bring it down to earth for a second. What does this actually mean for you and me? Why should we care about a bunch of rocks in a field in Armenia? Basically, this discovery proves that our understanding of the past is fragile. We think we have the whole picture, but we are looking at a puzzle with half the pieces missing. The vault isn't necessarily a steel safe with a combination lock. In archaeology, the vault is the context. It is the sealed layer of history. The University of Munster didn't just find a building, they found a missing link in the evolution of Christianity. Before this dig, we had the legends. We had the stories of Gregory the Illuminator written down centuries later. Historians are always skeptical of legends. They say, oh, that's just a myth, that didn't happen. They treat the ancient texts like fairy tales. But this octagon is solid proof. It proves that there was a massive, sophisticated, state-sponsored effort to cement the new religion immediately after the date given in the legends. It proves the stories were rooted in stone and mortar. The king was real, the conversion was real, and the architecture was world-class. As for the forgotten gospel, or the hidden knowledge, think of it this way. This building represents a branch of history that was cut off. Western Christianity went one way, centered on Rome. Eastern Christianity went another. By digging up Artaxata, we are recovering the voice of that lost Eastern tradition. We are seeing how they built, how they worshipped, and what they valued. The gospel here is the story of a people who stood at the crossroads of empires and chose their own path. It is a story of resilience. The vault has been opened. The light is pouring in. But let's push the wild theory one last time. We are right next to Mount Ararat. For thousands of years, people have claimed that Noah's Ark is stuck in the ice up there. CIA spy planes have photographed anomalies. Astronauts have reported seeing shapes. Is it possible that the history we were taught in school is completely missing the most important chapter? The evidence in the mud of Artaxata suggests we have barely scratched the surface. The octagon is open, but the vault beneath it remains the ultimate mystery. If you want to keep digging into the truth with us and uncover the secrets the world forgot, hit that like button and subscribe.